Anthony, a black man, faces discrimination from a fellow passenger. Despite feeling accustomed to such treatment, Anthony is taken aback when the passenger requests a seat change solely based on his race. The situation escalates when Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, intervenes and confronts the passenger, unequivocally denouncing his racist behavior. This unexpected act of solidarity from Trump leaves Anthony feeling grateful and prompts him to reconsider his perception of Trump's stance on racism. My name is Anthony. As a black man, I've been used to facing discrimination and racism. It's something that has become a norm for me, unfortunately. I was attending a flight to Danvers for a business conference. I had been working hard for months to secure this client, and I was excited to finally seal the deal. As I made my way to my assigned seat on the plane, I noticed a white man sitting next to me. He had a stern look on his face and didn't even acknowledge my presence. I shrugged it off, used to being ignored or treated with hostility by people like him. As we settled in, the flight attendant came by to check if everyone was comfortable and to remind us to fasten our seatbelts. That's when the white man next to me called her over. "Excuse me," he said, with a hint of annoyance in his tone. "How can I help you, sir?" the flight attendant asked politely with a warm smile. "How do I say this? A different seat would be great. Maybe a nice cold one waiting for me when I get there," the passenger replied, giving me a disgusted look. I was taken aback by his words. Did he really just ask for a different seat because he didn't want to sit next to me? A black man. I felt a mix of anger and embarrassment course through me. But before I could say anything, the flight attendant intervened. "It's a little dark where I'm sitting." "Excuse me, sir? It's a bit too much culture where I'm sitting. Why don't you just seat me with some of my own kind?" "I'm sorry, sir, but this flight is fully booked. Your assigned seat is next to this gentleman and there are no other seats available," she said sternly, not backing down. The passenger grumbled, but he had no choice but to accept it. The flight attendant continued with her duties, leaving me and the passenger to sit in awkward silence. I could feel his eyes burning into me, and I could tell he was trying to come up with some comeback to insult me. But before I could even say anything, the man's words had caught the attention of another passenger on the flight, Donald Trump. Yes, the same Donald Trump who was once the President of the United States. Trump, who was seated a few rows ahead of us, turned around and said in a booming voice, "Excuse me, sir, did I just hear you request for a different seat because of your seatmate's race?" The man looked visibly uncomfortable as all eyes turned towards him. "Well, I didn't mean it like that," he stammered. But Trump wasn't going to let him off easily. He stood up from his seat and walked towards us, his anger evident on his face. "You know what's wrong with this country? Ignorant and racist people like you who think they can get away with such despicable behavior. Let me tell you, you won't get away with it today," Trump said, his voice laced with authority. I could only feel grateful for Trump's intervention and support. As a successful businessman and celebrity, his words held weight and could make an impact on people's minds. I also wondered what his true intentions were. Was he genuinely against racism, or was he just trying to make a statement in the presence of others? But regardless of his intentions, I knew what he said was true. Discrimination and racism were still prevalent in our society, and it was up to individuals like Trump to use their influence and speak out against it. The man kept his head down, probably feeling embarrassed and ashamed of his actions. I didn't want to hold a grudge against him, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that his racist attitudes were being challenged by someone in a position of power. As the man tried to justify his request, Trump continued to lecture him on how his mindset was a problem in today's society and how he couldn't simply demand a different seat because of someone's race. I sat there, amazed at how passionately Trump was speaking against racism. Growing up in Queens, New York, I have seen firsthand the effects of racism and discrimination. I have seen my own friends and neighbors suffer because of the color of their skin. And as a successful businessman, I have also faced adversity and discrimination based on my wealth and success. But I refuse to let these experiences define me and my beliefs. I am proud to be an American, and I believe in the principles of liberty, equality, and justice for all. It is time for us to come together as a nation and put an end to the destructive ideals of racism. First and foremost, let me make it clear that all human beings are created equal. No one race or ethnicity is superior to another. We are all part of the same human family, and we must treat each other with love, respect, and dignity. This is the foundation of our great nation, and we must never forget it. Unfortunately, I have seen an increase in hateful and discriminatory acts in recent years, and I must say, I am deeply disappointed. We have come so far as a nation, and yet some people still choose to judge others based on their skin color. This must end. We must also acknowledge the historical impact of slavery and the struggles that minority communities have faced in this country. We cannot erase the past, but we can learn from it and move forward together. It is time to put aside our differences and work towards a better future for all Americans. I have taken steps to combat racism and promote inclusivity. I have implemented policies that have brought economic opportunities to low-income communities and have encouraged diversity and inclusion in the workplace. But there is more work to be done. We must also address the issue of police brutality and racial profiling. I have been deeply disturbed by the cases of innocent citizens being targeted and mistreated by law enforcement. This is simply unacceptable and goes against everything our country stands for. We must work towards rebuilding trust between communities and law enforcement and ensuring that all citizens are treated fairly and justly. But we cannot do this alone. We must all take responsibility and do our part to promote unity and equality in our communities. We must have open and honest conversations about race and actively listen to each other's perspectives. We must also condemn any form of hate speech or discrimination, whether it be in person or online. I also urge the media to be responsible and ethical in their reporting. Sensationalizing and exaggerating race-related incidents only fuels division and hatred among our citizens. We must strive for accurate and fair representation of all races and cultures in our media. And let's not forget the younger generation. As a father and a grandfather, I am deeply concerned about the impact of racism on our children. We must educate our youth to be accepting and understanding of all races and cultures. We must teach them the importance of diversity and inclusivity in our society. I also want to address the recent protests and unrest in our country. I understand the frustration and anger, but let's not forget that violence and destruction only further divide us. We must find peaceful and constructive ways to address issues and bring about change. I was speechless as Trump shook my hand and patted me on the back. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Here was a man who I had always seen as controversial and divisive, standing up against racism and speaking up for me. It was a surreal moment. From that day onwards, I developed a newfound respect for Donald Trump. I started reading more about him and realized that his actions on the flight were not an isolated incident. He had a history of standing up against racism and promoting equality. In the 1970s, he fought against discrimination in his family's real estate business by refusing to rent apartments to people based on their race. This was a bold move at a time when segregation was still prevalent in many parts of the country. In the 1980s, Trump received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor for his contributions to promoting diversity and tolerance in his businesses. He also openly supported the LGBT community during a time when it was not widely accepted. As I dug deeper, I found out that Trump had always been vocal about his beliefs in promoting equality, fairness, and diversity. These were not just empty words, but rather actions that he took in his personal and professional life. His actions spoke louder than his words, and he had a track record to prove it. The Opportunity Zones initiative, included in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, aimed to spur economic development in distressed communities, including many with high minority populations. While the effectiveness of this program in reducing racial disparities remains subject to debate, some argue that it has the potential to uplift marginalized communities. Additionally, the Trump administration supported funding for historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, through the passage of the Future Act in 2019, which provided permanent funding for these institutions. This move was praised by HBCU leaders and advocates as a positive step toward supporting higher education opportunities for minority students. Furthermore, President Trump has at times spoken out against specific instances of racism or discrimination. Following the mass shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018, he condemned anti-Semitism and called for unity and tolerance. Similarly, after the killing of George Floyd in 2020, he expressed support for peaceful protests and condemned the actions of the police officers involved. I was in awe of the man who had stood up against racism in Central Park that day. I felt privileged to have witnessed that moment and to have learned about his history of standing up for what is right. As the flight progressed, Mr. Trump and I struck up a conversation. We talked about my writing, his business empire, and his recent foray into politics. I was impressed by his sharp mind and unwavering confidence. He had a clear vision for where he wanted to take the country, and I admired his determination to make it happen. Despite our differing backgrounds and beliefs, we found that we had a lot in common. We shared a passion for success and a drive to achieve our goals. We even had similar views on some of the most pressing issues facing our country. It was a pleasant surprise to discover that beyond all the media, hype, and controversy, Mr. Trump was just a regular person with his own dreams and aspirations. Mr. Trump, it's an honor to meet you. I must say, I've been following your journey closely, from your business ventures to your recent entry into politics. It's quite inspiring. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been quite the journey indeed. And please, call me Donald. Your approach to business and now politics has certainly made waves. What inspired you to transition into politics? You know, I've always believed in making a difference and shaking things up where necessary. I saw a lot of problems in our country that needed fixing, and I felt I had the skills and the vision to tackle them head on. Politics seemed like the next logical step for me to make a real impact. That's commendable. It takes a lot of courage to step into such a polarizing arena. Speaking of which, how do you handle all the media scrutiny and controversy surrounding you? Well, it's certainly not easy, I'll tell you that much. But I've always had a thick skin and a determination to push forward despite the noise. At the end of the day, I focus on the work that needs to be done and the promises I made to the American people. Your determination is evident, Donald, and it's refreshing to see someone so focused on delivering results. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing our country right now? There are plenty of challenges, no doubt about it. But I believe the economy and national security are at the top of the list. We need to ensure prosperity for all Americans and protect our borders from threats abroad. It's about putting America first and making sure our citizens are safe and prosperous. Absolutely, those are crucial issues. I admire your dedication to addressing them. And beyond politics, what are your personal aspirations or goals? Well, you know, I've always been driven by success. Whether it's in business or politics, I aim to leave a lasting legacy of achievement. But more than anything, I want to see America thrive and succeed like never before. That's what keeps me going every single day. That's a noble ambition, Donald. And I have no doubt that with your determination and vision, you'll continue to make strides toward that goal. It's been truly enlightening speaking with you. Likewise, it's been a pleasure. And remember, always aim high and never give up on your dreams. That's the key to success. As the plane landed in Danvers, I left the flight with a valuable lesson learned. Trump may be a controversial figure, but he had taught me something important that day. The fight against racism needs to be a collective effort, and standing up against it, no matter who the perpetrator may be, is the right thing to do. I continued to keep in touch with Trump, and he even invited me for a meeting. It was a surreal experience to be sitting across from the man who had once taught a racist passenger a lesson on a flight. Looking back, I can't help but smile at how a chance encounter on a flight led to a beautiful friendship and a valuable lesson. In a world filled with hate and discrimination, it is important to remember that there are still good people out there who are willing to stand up against injustice. And for me, one of those people will always be Donald Trump. I am proud to call him my friend, and I will always stand by him and support him in the next presidential campaign.